and is expected to rise by 3.6% to $9.1 trillion this year. In the Arab world, travel and tourism contributed $244 billion last year. Travel and tourism supported 319 million jobs last year. That's 1 in every 10 jobs in the world. And this is expected to rise by 2.9% to 328 million jobs this year. In the Arab world, total employment is about 11.2 million jobs. That's 9.9% of all jobs created in the region. International tourist arrivals globally increased by 5.6% from 2017 to this year to 1.4 billion. In the Arab world, it increased by 5.5% to 83.8 million. The global number of airline passengers grew by 6.9% from 2017 to 4.4 billion in 2018. The aviation industry supports 65.5 million jobs around the world, contributes $2.7 trillion to the global GDP, and carries more than a third of world trade by value. IATA forecasts that the value of international trade shipped by air next year will be $6.7 trillion, whereas tourists traveling by air this year are forecast to spend $909 billion. By 2036, global air transport is forecast to support 97.8 million jobs and contribute $5.7 trillion to the global economy. You all know that socio-economic growth and human interaction are being promoted by the doubling of city pairs to more than 22,000 this year, and by the halving of air transport costs over the past 20 years. Interesting to note that the average return fare before surcharges and tax this year is forecast by IATA to be $317. That's 61% lower than in 1998 after adjusting for inflation. The regional market share of global airline passenger traffic shows a clear shift to the east. In 1965, it was 90% for Europe and the Americas, with 10% for the rest of the world. Last year, it was 55.7% for the Americas and Europe, and 42.2% for Asia Pacific and the Middle East. The share of Asia Pacific and the Middle East is expected to be almost 50% by 2028. For this year panel, I intend to focus on the aviation achievements, challenges, and opportunities of the ACO member airlines. But first, please help me welcome our distinguished panelists. Engineer Kamil Al-Hawadi, CEO of our host, Kuwait Airways. Captain Ahmed Adel, Chairman and CEO, Egyptair Holding Company. Mr. Abdul Mohsen Junaid, CEO, Saudi Gulf Airlines. Mr. Henrik Holroyd, Director General for Mobility and Transport at the European Commission. Thank you very much. For the next 56 minutes, I will have an interaction with our panel and turn to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for your contributions, questions, and comments as soon and as often as possible. Let me first turn to the issue of the environment. It was very much the focus of the presentation we had of this morning. We know the challenges, we know the opportunities for making a difference to the environmental footprint of our sector. We all are proud of the achievements of this sector over the last 70 years in terms of reducing our carbon and environmental footprint. Clearly, more needs to be done as the sector keeps growing. We've been obviously advocating a global approach to this issue. We've had challenges with the European Union when it came up with its EU ETS some time back. But I think today it's very much water on the bridge as we have actually embraced a more global-centric approach by ICAO through the adoption of CORSIA. At the last assembly of ICAO, CORSIA was very much the center of discussions. And I'd like to start by asking Henrik first. Given the European Union's advocacy on the subject of the environment, what is your position now after the ICAO Assembly in terms of CORSIA, in terms of what the global community is doing, knowing that some members of the European Union are also still trying to find national initiatives in the process? Henrik.
Thank you very much, Vijay, and I'm extremely honored and very, very humbled to be part of this distinguished panel, and of course another ARCO AGM, and I'm very grateful to my friend Abdul Wahab for still having me here year after another, and it's also great for the European Commission to be present and to interact with so many important partners of this region. And I was also very pleased earlier today when Abdel Nabi Manar was also in his presentation pointing out how much the EU and the ICAO as well as the ARCO are actually cooperating. And I also used the opportunity right away to extend the invitation to all of you to the EU Arab Aviation Summit in Beirut on the 23rd and 24th of March. It will be a great opportunity also to discuss these and other issues. But now, coming to your question, Vijay, I think we can largely agree that the issue of sustainability of aviation has become one of the key topics today in the global scale. And I think we have also seen a big shift over the last perhaps 12, 18 months in the societal perceptions and the way how sustainability has actually moved up in the agenda. And that was also during the morning, it was pointed out in number of presentations, and I think that it's very good that we understand this challenge, and that there are also very clear actions which are undertaken, because this is not an easy one. There is no magic wand. There is no one solution. It is a combination of different basket of measures, which were also very clearly pointed out by the presentation of Abdul Wahab, and clearly all these different measures play a very important role. Now, one of those measures which was pointed out is also the market-based measures and offsets, which is the CORSIA. And just about a month ago, when we concluded the ICAO's 40th Assembly, we had quite a heated discussion there. But most importantly, I think we agreed on all the building blocks which are needed so that the CORSIA can kick in 2021. And I know that a number of airlines in this region have also been very actively advocating in their countries to take part. I'm grateful that these countries have also pledged to be already as part of the preliminary phase from 2021, and I think this is also a very strong message. On top of that, I actually do believe that this region and many of the airlines in this region can serve as very good examples for the rest of the world. The fleets here are younger. The commitment to sustainability is actually very strongly present, and over those 2 days when I have also had the opportunity to meet a number of airline CEOs who are present here, all those discussions, the consciousness about the challenge as well as the need to deliver of the aviation sector is being very clear. So I'm very encouraged about that, and I'm sure that also we will use the EU-Arab Aviation Summit in order to highlight the commitment to the sustainability. But what I would also expect more is that the aviation sector more generally should be vocal and not to be in defensive but also offensive. I think a certain momentum was also lost on the global scale, where the airlines industry could have come out and said what have we done and what we intend to do and what is actually needed in order to do that. But there, as the momentum was lost, nowadays it is very much that one has to defend what we are doing rather than to offensively explain what has been done and what more will be done in order to make the sector also more sustainable. And CORSIA is a very good tool and a very important tool, and I think it's going to play a role in the global scale, but it is also clear that different regional entities would also look whether and how to do more. And I think this is also, according to the interpretation of the Chicago Convention, this is also their right to do that, unless it is, if it is done in non-discriminatory basis, because the expectations in different parts of the world are also very different. And I think the most important thing to add here is that since there is no one solution that can help us to get to more sustainable flight path or more sustainable aviation, then the combination of those different measures have to be looked into, and more efficient engines, better designed aircrafts, more effective flight paths, they all actually contribute. In Europe, for example, if we would not have the fragmentation of the European airspace, about 10% of the CO2 emissions in aviation could be cut. But those same member states who talk about the need for more sustainability at the same time do not do anything in order to make the airspace less fragmented. So there is also certain controversies that we need to address, and we need to also do it in a rigorous manner. So, and lastly, I would say a big potential which is untapped, and which was also pointed out by Abdul Wahab, by Alexander in his presentation, are the sustainable aviation fuels. And Europe will be very much committed in order to create a predictable framework for these fuels, in order to try to commercialization, and of course in order to try to increase the production, so that in the long run the sustainable aviation fuels can also play a bigger role than today in order to decarbonize aviation.
Thank you very much, Henrik. Very comprehensive, and you hit basically the nail on a number of very critical subjects when it comes to the environment and aviation. Kamil, you want to add anything to this in terms of whether the airline industry is doing enough to actually share its own success stories when it comes to the environment, and basically put the discussions in a proper context, as opposed to being, as Henrik mentions, on the defensive all the time?
So I may have a controversial view on how I would say aviation was picked on when it comes to the environment. So without a doubt, pretty much anything on this planet has a negative impact on the environment. And when you look at the aviation industry, it's actually about transporting passengers from A to B, which involves having an airline, okay? Not necessarily an airport, but an airline. When you look at the aviation industry today, you have the manufacturers taking a big piece of the revenue from the airlines, then you have airports taking the other piece, and then you have all the handling agents and so on, and regulatory authorities, and everybody's taking a piece out of the airline. So all these businesses that you mentioned and the jobs that you mentioned all actually rely on the airline existing. Now, when we move towards the aviation industry and the environment and what happened over the last few years in regards to the environment, you see immediately the solution was by the EU to apply a scheme, the EU ETS, immediately onto the airline. Manufacturers not involved, the authorities not involved, the ATCs not involved, the airports and hold times, and so there was no requirement for anybody to invest any of their, let's say, revenues into helping the environment. It was immediately just moved over to the airline. And when you look at this chain, the airline actually is the weakest link in actually trying to improve the damage to the environment due to aviation. And if you look at Europe, for example, and as Henrik said, there's plenty to do just by the ATC. Forget the airports and forget how everything works, the investment in infrastructure, it just goes straight to the airline. An example that I did, so I'm not very involved with it anymore, but when the EU ETS first started, I reviewed all the hold times that we had over Heathrow, and the average for the year was 20 minutes. So we had 20 minutes that we held over Heathrow, and initially when the EU ETS started, we were paying for, which makes no sense, okay? So my view on this is, if you want, so the other part of this first is, I understand the EU's position in applying a form of tax, because nobody else wanted to do it, and I think ICAO is where it is today because it wanted to resolve the solution that the EU initially started. So I would say it was a good move for the EU to initiate this, but I don't think they should have taxed the airlines immediately once they first started. But now where we're at now, I would love to know the states that are involved, the signatory states to the UN and ICAO. When you look at their participation and how they intend to reduce the aviation carbon footprint, I bet you'll see it's nothing in comparison to how much energy and effort the airlines have put into this.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Ahmed, you want to add anything on the? Yep.
First of all, thanks for the great hospitality, Abu Khalid and my friend Mr. Kamel. We always feel at home coming to Kuwait. Actually, there's nothing more to add after what Mr. Henrik and Mr. Kamel said. Putting things in perspective is very important because it's becoming a case not of double jeopardy, maybe triple jeopardy. The problems that occur with the engine manufacturers, the airlines has to pay for it. Infrastructure of airports, the airlines have to pay for it. You've been looked at as a cash cow, taxations, and nobody's looking at the bigger picture. You kindly made a great introduction about the benefits and how the airlines bring people together and the contributions that happened in the past decade when it came to technologies and when it came to reducing the emissions. So I think there are two aspects to make it in brief. The first aspect is conveying this message to the society and putting things in perspective. Because if we are emitting 2.5% of the total emissions and you have other industries that emit maybe double or triple that and they're not involved or being taxed and you're looking at the airline. And the other aspect is going forward and bringing the entities together for the greater benefit. Maybe investing more in real sustainable air fuel. We were having a conversation yesterday about something that's outside of the box. The technologies that's happening with the Wi-Fi and the streaming and all of that. You can move some of the screens from aircrafts and have a lighter aircraft that burns less fuel. You put an aircraft in the air and you make the ATCs shorter, but you go to a congested airport and you waste all that into a holding pattern. So I think the whole industry has to come together and start really contributing and not putting it only on the shoulder of the airlines.
Thank you very much, Abid. Abdul Mohsen?
السلام عليكم. شكرا جزيلا على هذه الفرصة. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I think a lot has been said, but I have a word for Mr. Henrik. And this is something I said during the closed session for the AGM members. And when the actual scheme started back, I think it was 2010 or something, the ideas we have is that we sell you oil, you're going to sell us air. Simple. The fact that you're coming up with this scheme, the way it was actually introduced, no discussions, no negotiations, no nothing, is bluntly spoke about a very, excuse the expression, rude way of actually bringing a noble idea, if you like. Today we're talking about sustainable fuel alternatives, even that. Maybe you just don't want our oil and you really want to come up with an alternative. So this is how this whole thing was viewed at the very beginning. Today, I think after this whole thing went to ICAO, through the General Assembly in the UN, the debates that took place back in 2014, I remember in Singapore Air Show, everybody was just waiting for April 2016 when a decision is to be made, and it's made. Corsia is here, Corsia is born, and it is born as a very strong child. Now it has been embraced and supported by the globe, if you like. And I think it's a fate and it's a destiny. So to argue about the actual initiative, the benefits, the pros, cons, I think this is something that we should put behind us. Another thing I mentioned, I think today we have an obligation towards this actual program. We have all committed to this. We will be committing one way or another. Sustainability is a buzzword now amongst the youngsters, even in my house. I have little kids, young kids, who just finished college that actually use the word sustainability. I did not use sustainability. So we've been challenged also in our own backyards. So I think Corsia today, the way it is introduced, the way we have it in its wholesome shape, if you like, is something that we have to focus on actually making work. But I go back to your question, which I really did not hear any answer, or that portion of your question from Mr. Henrik. When you spoke about individual states, European states, wanting to actually impose additional taxes. Now, what is the stand or the view of ICAO, of the European community from such activity? Because here we are sitting here gathered, and we are barely now convinced that there is a child that has to be nourished and has to be taken care of. And in the backyard, there are some people talking about different initiatives. So we really need to hear about that, your view about this.
Thank you, Abdul Mohsen, and thank you for reminding us of that little question, because I think it's something which I've never known Henrik to be shy. So, but this is actually, and he took on a good fight, I must say, when Europe was actually down that path of EU ETS, and was able to actually bring it back to the ICAO fold, and where the world was waiting to debate these issues. And this is where things are moving now. But there's still those rather disconcerting threats and actions which are undermining that global approach to the system. So Henrik, what is your plea to your member states in ensuring that ICAO is able to deliver its global agenda on climate change?
Well, I don't have any doubts that the states which have already signed up to the Corsia would not start delivering also from the 2021. And I also agree that in the past, certainly some mistakes were made in a way how the ETS was conceived and the way how it was also let's say, explained or not explained to the other participants. But this is all, in a way, history. And I think that we managed in ICAO, in particular, in 2016, to have the breakthrough in terms of the political agreement on the CORSIA. What is the beauty about CORSIA? CORSIA is not a perfect scheme, it's far from that, but the climate change is a global challenge. And for the global challenge, you need the global community to come together, as they have in the context of ICAO also, to address that. Because you can do whatever you want in your own corner, and it doesn't help for the global scale, because the air is also something which moves around. And that's why you need the global commitment. So that's why the global scheme is always better than any kind of regional scheme. Now, I think this was a very good basis, and of course on the basis of that also the ETS is not in that sense on the table, because for the time being it has been, the application has been postponed. So for the time being it is not applied to the non-EU carriers. Internally within the EU airspace we have been doing that, and the European carriers have also got used to that. So I think we have a good understanding that we are not there to impose extraterritorial measures, and we haven't done that. But of course, as it was also noted, the time has moved on, and the societal expectations are also different. And when it comes to the fight against climate change, as we also see, it has become much more of a political issue, it has become much more of a societal issue than it was perhaps even 2 years ago. And whatever kind of actions also regionally, the regional entities are going to undertake, I think the most important thing is that it has to be transparent, it has to be non-discriminatory. And I think this is the main thing. Yes, we have a lot of discussions also currently in the EU about how to address the aviation emissions. There are also talks about kerosene tax, there are talks about air passenger duties, but look, it's nothing new. Air passenger duties are present in most of the European airports, and all the airlines who are flying there are also paying that through the passengers. And when it comes to the taxis, then also there are for internal aviation, in number of countries the kerosene tax is present as well. But these are all the discussions, and I think that it's very important that these discussions continue. For the time being, what is clear is that there is a clear commitment to start implementing CORSIA through the scheme in 2021, and the European Union and its member states are also fully committed to that global scheme.
Thank you very much. Abdullah.
Thank you, Vijay, on this particular point. And a comment I have that I think Henrik would be able to address it, or at least to explain whether my thinking is correct or not. The way I see it in Europe, there is some sort of mutual complacency between governments, politicians, and environmental groups. And that complacency actually is aiming at, all right, fine, aviation is growing too fast, it's emitting too much, no matter what happens, the growth is not going to be actually mitigated to the extent that the environment is going to benefit from it. So let us make aviation much more expensive to suppress the demand. And the reason why I say that is that I haven't heard any of the environmental groups saying anything about taxes going to environmental projects. They accept taxes as if, yes, it is a tool to make aviation more expensive and therefore not to grow that much, in fact, maybe to shrink. The problem which I see is that you mentioned that the industry has to be more proactive, not to be on the defensive. Shouldn't I expect from the European Commission to be more proactive rather than passive, before these what I call complacency between governments and the consumer groups? I understand politicians do not like to say something which is not popular, but these consumer groups or environmental groups who are flight shaming, who are seeking more taxes on aviation so that to suppress demands, isn't that something that the governments have to take the moral responsibility to talk to them, since they are collecting the money, that, all right, fine, if you want that, we will have to commit to put that money in the environment. Isn't that something that the regulators need to do or the governments need to do?
Eric?
Thank you, Abdul Wahab. It makes perfectly sense what you also say. I mean, in the end of the day, the taxes which are collected also, and what you have today, be it in the air passenger duty or any other kind of taxes on aviation, they are going to the general coffers. They are not going back to the sector. I think that also what the sector in Europe is saying is that, look, we are ready to pay if we also know that these taxes are being used in order to put money into the research and innovation, in order to continue to support the development of more efficient engines, more efficient aircrafts, and also, of course, to develop the market for the sustainable aviation fuels. But it's also well known that the ministries of finance never want to have the earmarking of any of the taxes, and they want to use the money freely. And the European governments are not different to any other governments, and it will be very difficult to have a tax which is collected, let's say, for example, from aviation, and then to make sure that also the revenues are being used in order to develop more sustainable and also greener aviation in the medium long term. So this doesn't really match together, but we will have to find a way. We will also have to find ways how to support the research and innovation, and that's what we are doing, and that's what we are continuing to do. But I come back to what I said earlier. There is not one single solution. They are all different measures, and these different measures in combination are actually going to make the difference. And we should be ready to take everywhere what we can. I think Kamal also brings a very good example, like, you know, if there is a congestion problem in the airport, I mean, then again, you're just going around burning fuel. This is not sustainable. This doesn't make sense, and in a way we also need to address these inefficiencies as part of the overall equation. I think this is the important element, and not to concentrate on one or another measure, because no single measure can make a difference.
Absolutely. Can I turn to all of you? You've got a clicker in front of you. I'm going to ask you to actually switch it on. You just need to press CE, which is on your left-hand side. Just press it on. And then the first question, which is being put to you now, which very much follows the discussion we just had in terms of whether we are proactive enough or reactive or positive about the environmental impact. And if you would just answer either yes or no, yes by pressing A and no by pressing B, and after which please press on OK to close this vote. Basically, do we need to make the world understand that airlines are mere end users of aircraft to deliver a most valuable service to the world? So once you've voted, we'll see the results of your vote in the most instantaneous way. So yes A, no B. Do we have the answers? Okay, so we've got about so 12.5% are saying yes, and 4.17% are B, and 83% are thinking about it as we talk. So clearly,
Vijay, apparently there is something went wrong, because the people who did not answer are the overwhelming majority.
yes.
Only 15 answered, or maybe 20. Maybe if you can repeat the question and explain what you mean by it.
Okay. So I think you've got the A and B, A for yes, B for no. The question basically is whether you think the world needs to better understand that the airlines are not the ones who actually manufacture aircraft or engines, that we are mere users of a product which we do not manufacture. and that they need to understand that the airlines are in the business of delivering a service which the world needs. We've highlighted that throughout the discussion, whether in terms of socio-economic growth, in terms of jobs, in terms of tourism, in terms of human interaction. The airlines play a valuable role. As we say, it's a force for good. Knowing that, does the world need to better understand that the environmental impact, although the airline is probably the most visible actor out there, we are just end users of a product. So could I ask you to, let's do that vote again. If you agree that the world needs to better understand, which means that we, and not just we, but perhaps governments, commissions, international organizations need to basically better advocate that role of aviation and the responsibility of aviation in the climate environmental debate. So if you can just click on yes, A or B, and then close by clicking on OK. Yeah, make sure you close. After you've voted, you must close. Okay? Just press OK. I don't know what happens when you press OK, but you press OK, then your vote gets registered. Okay. Try to use only one clicker as opposed to your neighbor's clicker as well. Shall we see the results? See whether we made progress? Okay. Okay, that's very good. So basically, there's about 30% of you believe that the world needs to better understand this rationale. As I've got your attention, let me move, if you take this off, I'll put you to the second question, which goes back to Henrik's point earlier about the 10% environmental impact of ATC problems in Europe. I mean, I was reading that from January to June of this year, in Europe, 1,000 flights per day were moved from the optimal flight pattern, which resulted in 27% of additional fuel burn. Hence, a bigger environmental impact. So the question we have, as obviously it was highlighted in our discussion here, the airlines are the most visible part of this iceberg. But the bigger impact is actually not visible. Which, please, Abdul, please.
We're a captive industry. You know, we're just captive. Like you have captive audience. We're easy to fiddle with and to impose new regulations. We're captive. Can't go only to the airport or nowhere else. This is why I think in a lot of instances, regulators find it easy to deal with airlines. I mean, what you're saying, what has been also explained by Mr. Kamal is unacceptable. And it's something that should have been dealt with ahead of making these regulations and imposing these measures. Now it's, again, I think today, who was it? This global flight guy who showed us the statement of Tim Clark, where manufacturers, they want the money, the last penny before delivery. Then they'll tell you, by the way, we need to cooperate in solving out reliability problems. And this is what's happening now. Now the industry has to continuously run after regulators, after service providers, to actually fix a situation that should have been looked at and examined before actually passing these laws.
Your point leads us straight into this next question. So if you could probably put the second question vote to the vote, please. And if you switch on your clicker by pressing CE, and then vote either yes or no. The question this time is, do we need to make the world understand that aircraft and engine manufacturers, air traffic control providers, and aviation fuel suppliers need to urgently do much more to reduce the environmental footprint of their products and services? If you can please vote, panel and Distinguished delegates, please switch on your clicker and vote yes or no and press OK. Okay, can we see the results, please? Interestingly, nobody voted for B.
Vijay, if you may allow me,
Please.
I need to make a quick comment. Surprisingly enough, I voted B on the first question. Because
On the first question?
On the first question. So because saying we're a mere user, this is kind of getting away from the responsibility. Because as a user, you have a role to play in reducing emissions on the environment. And I'll go back to your comment of saying that us as airlines, we are the tip of the iceberg. I want to take the picture, maybe look at the bigger picture. Because if we're going to act upon the results of how people answered these questions, this means we want to convey a message to the world about the contributions of the industry and on the positive side and on the negative side when it comes to the environment. So I think the message has to start about that the airline industry is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to emissions in the world, and start from there. So we put things in perspective. And then we go inside of our industry and start talking about what manufacturers and governments and everybody who's tangible with the industry have to do to contribute to lesser emissions.
Very good point.
So sorry, I'm
Yes.
going to jump in also. I fully agree with Captain Ahmed. So when we're saying yes or no here, we're not saying that we don't play a role, okay? It's not that we're not saying, and in fact, I don't think there's an airline here that doesn't look at its fuel consumption and optimizing its performance. Everybody spends a lot of money and time and effort and training to optimize how it uses its aircraft and how it consumes its fuel. It's unfortunate, though, that it seems to be focused only on the airline. If the other aviation entities spend half the time that airlines do on fuel optimization and training and so on, then we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Yeah. There's also the reality that in terms of impact at the end of the day, if you look at all those four sectors, airline, ATC, aircraft manufacturers, fuel, jet fuel, the others have the potential to have much more impact than the airline industry, however good our record has been, but the impact can never be as good as what the others can do. But unfortunately, the others have never been in that forefront of the discussion, and all the attention has been on the airlines, and all the sticks have been basically thrown at the airlines in the process. But I think it's very important, given this social dimension this debate is taking, especially in some countries more than others, that there's a better coordination in terms of a coordinated response to it. Can I just move you, because time is pressing, to another subject which is very important to this region in particular, human capital challenges, human resources, basically human resources. With the growth in this region and in the world, it's almost double-digit growth in the next 20 years. The Arab world is fortunate to have more than 60% of its population under the age of 25. The question I have to you, and Alexandre mentioned it earlier also, in terms of the gender imbalance, which obviously is, if it wasn't clear to you, it's probably clear to you now that you've seen the panel, that we do have a gender imbalance problem in this sector. My question to you, gentlemen, is what are you personally and as CEO of your airline going to do to support this 25 by 2025 campaign in promoting gender equality? We start with Abdul Mohsen.
I think you couldn't have asked this question at a much better time for a person who's coming from Saudi Arabia. The whole country, under the Vision 2030, is speaking about this, and is acting to it. And female empowerment and gender equality in terms of enablement at all levels is being embraced by the highest in the country. So it's no longer a choice within our organizations. It's no longer something that we have to debate. It is a reality, it's a fact, and it's just happening, I think, at a speed that is worrisome to some of us here. But I give you an example, like in our small airline, Saudi Gulf, we were able to make an impact where we actually introduced the first female check-in agents in the kingdom. This never happened before. Back in 2017, we actually introduced female check-in agents who are working in the airport. And of course, the other airlines followed suit, and today you can go to Jeddah, Riyadh, Dammam, any airport in the kingdom, and you will find this. Also, when it comes to specific jobs, we're also doing our best, and I speak about myself. There is a gentleman here who was my predecessor. We put the first female workforce in our revenue management. And to date, I would say they're the only female staff that are working within the revenue management. So we're thinking, and today when we look at the issue of recruitment, this gender issue, I believe, does not exist. We're looking for best fitment. We're looking for best return on whatever decision that we will make. And this is happening all over the kingdom. I mean, you can just pick up any Saudi newspaper and take a good look and just compare to 5 years ago. What is happening in Saudi Arabia is basically a total move towards this. And I think if the qualified individuals are out there, and I know a lot of qualified individuals will be available over the next 5 years, because we hear and we listen and we actually do some research, and we identified a lot of females who are actually finding their way to the aviation industry and actually having set their mind on specific issues. So from from our point of view, it's an obligation, and we have to deliver. And we're being asked even by the government itself. So 2030 vision within Saudi Arabia is bringing a massive change, and I think it's going to answer this call with facilitation from the highest in the kingdom.
Thank you. Kamil?
So I understand the question. I've actually been asked this question a couple of times, and
Not this afternoon, but that's right.
Yeah. So I'm not sure why we even have this question asked. I'm not sure. I mean, it just happens to be, at least for Kuwait, when we advertise job, we don't advertise gender whatsoever. Okay, and there's no gender-related task or job in Kuwait Airways at all. Why there happen to be more men and women, I'm just guessing it's the way it is. It's not singled out that we prefer men or prefer women. Kuwait has women ministers. One of our ex-chairmen and CEO was a woman. The rest of what's left of Kuwait Airways team right now are two little short women sitting over there in the corner. So we don't differentiate between gender whatsoever. Okay, it's that's never taken into consideration. But what I did notice in Europe, when this same question gets asked almost in every conference, they actually start coming up with justifications. But I actually can't see where there is a targeted process where we say, you know what, in aviation we're only going to take men. I don't see that anywhere. At least, unless I'm blind, I don't see an intent to isolate women from aviation at all. I don't know why there are more men than women. I truly don't. But I've never seen an industry that's very flexible for men and women, and this is it, at least in my opinion, this is the situation right now.
I think that is probably part of the challenge, you see, is that, and this is not specific to this region, this is a global problem we're talking about, is that whereas, as Kamil said, there's no intent to exclude women from this industry, the challenge is that the reality is there are very few women. So it's not a matter of now not excluding women, it's a matter of how do we try to encourage women to join.
Understood. But so I, on the risk of being sounding biased, okay, and I'm not, towards what I'm going to say. So when you step into a hotel, you generally expect to find nurses that are women, and you do get men nurses, but most of the time I would say the ratio is 90% women and 10% men, and on average, okay? Why isn't there a drive to say, okay, you know what, in hospitals we need to drive? It might be a tendency for one gender to prefer this type of job than the other. There's nobody forcing a man not to be a nurse, okay, but I mean, if he wants to be, he can be, okay? But instead of looking at it as, you know, why not, and goodness what, I think the aviation industry is making a big deal about this, okay? And I don't think there is any part of the aviation industry that says, no, we don't want women, okay? The question why women are not in the aviation industry, I mean, it's not, I personally think it's not particularly true. It might not be a job that interests women. It may not be, okay? I mean, we have women pilots, we have women engineers who are working in line in the heat and so on and so forth. And we've never rejected women or men, but the women that are coming to apply for engineering are far, you know, there's, I would say 1% of the task force. Why? It's a tough, hot, sweaty job. Maybe they prefer not to have that. I'm not sure, but there's no intent.
Ahmed?
Well, I tell you, it's tough answering after Kamel because he covers every point and I'm in line with what he's saying. So let me put it in a different way. A qualified person for a job is a qualified person for a job, putting gender aside, be it a man or a woman. And if you dissect in our industry, I have the privilege of chairing 9 subsidiary companies that work in different fields in aviation. So when we are hiring cabin crew, we look at the numbers of our cabin crew and how it is fitted gender-wise. And the last time we wanted 150 cabin crew personnel, we said 90% we want them females, you know, to compensate for the numbers that we have. So nobody's going to come to you and say you're not being politically correct when it comes to gender. When it comes to hiring cockpit crew, we say we want a number. We never say what the gender is. And when you have you want 200 pilots and you have 400 that have applied for the job, and you say you get your 200, you might find that a lot of men are left out and women who are qualified got accepted. So I think it is very hard to say 25 by 25 because there are different fields. I think what's more fair to say is that giving equal chance for qualified personnel disregarding of the gender, and when they join the same job they get equal pay. So you don't discriminate in qualifications and you don't discriminate when it comes to pay.
Absolutely right. Can I, before I turn to you ladies and gentlemen, for some additional questions and comments, Enrique, you want to?
Yes, I thought that I should also say something about the topic because I do believe that there is a significant shortage of personnel in the aviation industry in the next decade to come. And if we look at the forecast, for example, we talk about 500,000 additional pilots who are needed within the next decade, and I think, if I remember correctly, about 10% of that in the Middle East. So it also shows that since we look at the aviation industry forecast, then we also see that there is a significant increase in the forecast in terms of the number of flights, in terms of the number of aircrafts also in the air. So there is a need for the additional workforce. And I think what is important is that we also concentrate in attracting young people to this sector and continue to attract that. And I think that the different initiatives also which are done by ICAO and elsewhere when it comes to the promotion of the young aviation professionals and so on, I think they are extremely important, because that is also the way how to promote and how to make that attractive. And this is a global issue. And of course, there are some regional specificities, but it is a global issue as such. As it comes to women, I think it is difficult to say that aviation is a very balanced, gender-balanced industry. It's not. And I think that there should be a positive discrimination, which means that we should also find a way how to attract more women to join this industry and to play a bigger role. Because if you take a very simple comparison, you take the cabin crew, and you see that in the cabin crew you have quite a high degree and not the percentage of women. And then you take the pilots and you see a very little percentage of women. At the same time, they are working on the same aircraft, they are working on the same shifts. So that is not an issue. It is just that they need the encouragement. And I think that the more there is diversity, the more there is gender balance also, the better the industry will be in the longer run. And this is also actually subject or verified by the different studies which show that the more diversity there is, the more efficiency also comes out of this specific industry. And I think that there is still a potential in the aviation industry that is untapped at the moment.
Thank you very much, Henry.
Vijay?
Gentlemen.
Vijay?
Yes.
Yeah, over here, over here. Over here?
Down there.
Oh, Samir, yes,
There you go.
please.
I agree with Kamal. I don't think there is a major gender problem in the airlines from a positive sense. I mean, there is no discrimination at the moment being practiced, but I think it's just going to take time. It's going to take time for this new generation of females, alongside their male colleagues, to get up through the ranks and get to the point when they're sitting on the panel instead of the gentleman sitting there at the moment. So I'm not sure in this day and age, over the last 5, 10, 15 years, there have been positive discrimination against women. And I agree that most airline CEOs do take a positive attitude towards putting the most qualified person in place. It's just going to take time for those qualified women to get up to the top positions and get up to the sea level. And I'm also against positive discrimination for employing people, because I find it difficult as an airline CEO or somebody in management to give preference to a less qualified woman than a more qualified male in this day and age. So it's not easy. So in principle, I agree with the part of the panel that there is no particular problem at this particular point in time. It's just going to take time.
Thank you very much, Samir. Yes, Ramos.
Excuse me, gentlemen, excuse me.
Yes.
We have 2 minutes to go, please.
Okay. Just saying, I agree with Mr. Henrik here. This will not happen by accident, or it's not going to be a natural evolution. There has to be programs, there has to be encouragement, there has to be explanation to actually make this happen. Through the evolution of the industry itself, you went from the extreme lift, where it was extremely harsh to operate, and so on and so forth, today where you have a much nicer environment. A lot of things has to be explained, and the industry has to market itself to the females.
Absolutely. Any other comments or questions from the floor, please? Anyone wants to jump in on any other subject we've covered or subject we have not covered, which you would like to raise as we are about to end this panel? Anybody?
Could I some comment, please?
Please.
Regarding the age of work in aviation, when we talk about cabin crews and pilots, usually at this age, ladies get pregnant. And for that reason, after pregnancy, they got delivered. So we don't have them for a longer time. I think this is a restriction for them somehow. I'm not against gender equality, but I think according to their nature, and this age of work, for them, it's a time for fertility, and they get kids, and that I believe has to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from?
No further comments or questions.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Time is
Enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Kamil, Ahmed, Abdul Mohsen, and Henrik for your participation. Thank
I'm
you very
sorry,
much.
gentlemen, because we have very limited time. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thank you.